I just wanted to say thank you for having me, and thank you to Gwen. I am here to talk about summer safety and about adventuring. And I gave you a pretty big handout, as you'll see, but my hope was really, I wanted you just to have all that information. We don't have to talk about all of that information today, but because what I was thinking is that what I really wanted to leave you with was partly the objectives and partly just a different way of thinking about injury. You know, when we started doing child fatality review a long time ago, we lost about 800 Kentucky kids a year. That's a lot of kids. Think about how many classrooms. And it's better, but it's still about 600 kids a year, which includes the babies in the NICU who are born prematurely. It's not just older children, but it's a lot of children. And so I think it's important that we talk about it, but people sort of think about injury as kind of a downer, like either we want to keep kids safe by wrapping them up in bubble wrap, we're not going to let them do anything. You know, it's not nearly as interesting as cancer or Dance Blue or, you know, or all the wonderful trauma stories of fixing them after they get hurt. But you're public health nurses, and I think you know too that if we could prevent some of that, it would really be great. But it just seems like there's still a problem with people hearing us talking about injury. As lately as Friday, we were at a faculty meeting and people were talking about the pediatric blog, and they were saying, well, but we don't need more injury stories. We need some positive things. And I'm like, you know, and then I went to my office and I read about the CDC's sounding the alarm bell because after years of injuries among kids going down, and less so in the Southeast, but going down, all of a sudden in between like 13 and 16, the numbers were up. And the numbers are up for unintentional injuries, motor vehicles, and other unintentional injuries. And they're definitely up for homicides and suicides, and especially suicides. So I think we do need to talk about injury, but maybe we have to reframe it so people are willing to hear us. So I think there's two really big things. And one is that we really are not trying to keep kids wrapped up in cotton balls in a corner somewhere. They need to go outside more than they do. They'd be better in school if they ran around more at recess. They need to go out and play in general more than they do. And they, you know, we want them to adventure. But somehow we need to get across to parents that if you are safe or adventuring safely, you can have bigger and better adventures. And the other issue is that really, I think injury prevention is about empowering parents, and it really is a strengths-based thing if we talk about it that way. Because in a world where there's so little that you can control, you know, if you know that you've taught your kids to wear seatbelts and wear helmets, then you've equipped them as best you can. And I think in a world where people really fear leukemia and things you can't do much about, injury prevention is a way that you can actually do something to help your kids. But I think we have to really reframe the conversation in order to get people to hear us, because they just really still are not hearing us. And I also would say there's a ton of opportunity within schools to do injury prevention. I mean, as starting with like, well, you got to school today in your car, you know, how'd you come in your car? Where'd you sit? You know, you're 7 years old, did you sit in the front seat? You know, that's not ideal. Or just, you know, do you wear your seatbelt? Never, sometimes. You know, if you start, I think, with the assumption, people are pretty honest in what they tell you, but you have to ask. So the objectives for our day were partly that you would just be prepared to explain to people, both parents and your administrators, how appropriate safety measures can enhance not only summer fun, but year-round fun, and exploration for children rather than restricting it. And another good example is a lot of people run summer programs, and some of them use 15-passenger vans to transport kids, right? I see a lot of nodding heads. How many of your vans use any kind of booster seats? Anybody? How many of them transport elementary school kids? Yeah. Well, no booster seats. No. Well, you know, this is the piece people aren't thinking about, but if you're going to transport kids, first of all, the Kentucky law says you need a booster seat up till age 8, and secondly, for safety, you need a booster seat. And that's what we found too. So there's a whole host of people who run summer programs, which are really important for kids, but, you know, church youth groups, Ag Extension, YMCA, they run big buses around here, but there's a whole lot of people, school systems, running 15-passenger vans, which in the state of Tennessee aren't even legal to transport kids. And child care centers also that run daycare, you know, run special trips for kids, especially older trips. you still, if you're not, I'm 4'10" and a half. If you are not 4'9", you need a booster seat. So, that's a lot of kids. That's everybody almost, unless your parents were both basketball players, and we do have one friend like that. We had to take her out of a booster seat or she would have broken her neck on the ceiling. But she's the exception. Every second grader, every third grader, and some of the fourth graders really need a booster seat still. If you have a 15-passenger van with no headrests, you can't just boost them with a no-back booster, because now you've boosted them above the edge of the seat and their necks aren't protected. So they need high-back boosters. We can help with that kind of stuff if you call us. We have helped daycares with vans and to figure out what kind of seats or how to do the seating with kids at different ages so you get the best protection. But I would encourage people to think about that, because while we're thinking about taking them to fun stuff, we're not thinking about keeping them safe. It's also a liability issue, and sometimes that's the only thing people are willing to hear. The risk is you don't want them to not take them anywhere because it's too complicated, and we have had that happen. But we do want them to take them safely. We wanted to talk about the epidemiology of important summer injuries and some of the best evidence base. For instance, there are counties where they've given out lots of bike helmets. 2 or 3 times they've given out bike helmets. The kids are mostly still not wearing bike helmets, because you can't just give them out once and think it's going to happen. You really do need follow-up and second messages. And also, if the adults aren't wearing them, it's still sending the message that when you grow up, you don't need to wear a bike helmet, rather than sending the message that this is what everybody does. So we're kind of an unusual state. Like, fire for us is not just a winter issue in this state. We are a high fire death state, and fire is an issue year-round for our kids. And we have a bunch of smoke detector programs. So if you've got kids without smoke alarms in their house, we worked with Estill County. They put in 1,000 smoke alarms in 6 months, but more than 50% of those households did not have a single working alarm at the time they went in there. That's way worse than the national statistics that you read. But we can make a difference, and we can change it. So, and the other thing was the last thing was just specific to helmets, because we're really not very good at fixing heads. We can fix arms and feet and legs. We're really not very good at fixing heads. So just to know when you need a helmet. And the reason that I put this on here was that, we said, well, you need a helmet for a bike. Well, you need a helmet for an ATV. You need a helmet for a scooter. Well, then they came up with some different kinds of things. Now we have UTVs, and now we have different kinds of scooters. So as fast as we say what we need one for, some other toy will be invented. Hoverboards, rollerblades. So really, the easiest thing, honestly, is if it has 4 legs or it rolls and they're going to ride on it, they need a helmet. So anything that rolls, ideally, and anything that has 4 legs, most of which are obviously horses. But if you're going to ride a cow, if you're going to ride a sheep, you'd be surprised. A goat, those things are, they have those little rodeos with the kids where they ride the sheep. A helmet's really helpful. When they have the rodeo at the horse park, those kids should be wearing helmets. We can't fix their heads any better because they're rodeo kids than other kids. So, that's just the thing. And it has changed, and that's the thing that I think is hopeful. When my oldest daughter was really little, at age 4, people would come into daycare and say, well, I don't need a car seat anymore. I'm a big kid. And you don't really hear that anymore at 4, but you still hear it at 6 and 7. So we need to push the safety stuff higher, because we're doing a better job with the little ones than the bigger ones, I think. So that's the big picture. And I just wanted to say, too, that Gwen knows how to find me. Angie, I work with Angie every day, practically. They know how to find us. So if those of you already don't know how to find us, we will happily help in any way we can. But just again, you can go outside, you can adventure, but if you wear a helmet, if you choose the right vehicle, and in this case, these were really old Appaloosa horses that were patient with kids who didn't know what they were doing and who were just riding on saddle pads. But, it's not that you just have to be battened up and not able to do anything. And the other thing, I think it is really important that we advocate, actually, for kids to be able to get out and explore and play, because they're, I've seen daycares where that doesn't happen very much. It's work to take kids outside sometimes, but it really is. It's our job to get to explore the world safely, so we have to make it safer, and that includes playgrounds. So we talked about this. So injury is the leading cause of death still for all of our kids above age 1. Under 1, there's a lot of kids who die of other things because that have to do with their birth. But above age 1, injury is the leading cause of death, so we can make a difference. Also, injuries are not accidents. Things are almost always predictable. If you go fishing in a boat without a life jacket and you can't swim and you fall in, it's actually fairly predictable that you're going to drown. So it would be better to wear a life jacket. So that's the kind of stuff if we think about it. So again, as nurses, you have lots of different ways that you can impact injury prevention. You can do it individually with one child. You can do it by changing the culture of your school. There's one school in Kentucky, the only school I know of, that actually collects their injury reports. And they collected their playground injury reports, and it led them to take away a piece of equipment because they figured out that all their broken arms occurred on that one piece of equipment. So they looked at their injury data, and then they did something with it. And I would encourage you to do it. I think most of us don't actually do that. If you have a report, you send it somewhere, but nobody actually looks at the aggregate of them. The other thing is just learning from each other. You can change the social structures there. Again, I always worry, do any of you deal with adolescents? I mean, I worry a little because while I know that sometimes adolescents can be impetuous, many of the ways that adolescents get hurt, they get blamed for, basically. Oh, it's their risk-taking behavior. Oh, it's and the reality is that, for instance, adolescents who go to work in the summer are usually very good employees. They want to work. It's very exciting. They'll do anything at 14 that you ask them to do. Maybe not by 16, but at 14. So it's really important that they not be put in unsafe environments, because if you put them in one and you ask them to work on a deli slicer, or you have them driving a tractor 14 hours a day with no supervision, they are at risk because they want to be good employees. So it's partly our need to structure things that they have enough education about what they're going to do, that they have some supervision, that they get adequate breaks. And the same way even with teen driving. This is a very, very bad season. I think this is the worst 100 days for teen drivers in our state right now. And part of that is because summer is always, there's more kids driving, so there's more exposure. But we don't have very forgiving roads, and some days we don't even have very forgiving weather. My daughter said the other day that when she saw someone hydroplaning across the intersection, she decided to pull over. That we have really bad weather sometimes, and we definitely have no shoulders and not very forgiving roads. And even here in Lexington, the place our kids die is not on the streets around UK, it's on the rural roads. So, making sure that they get 50, 60 hours of training so that they learn how to drive without a lot of passengers. And in the summer, we always have carloads full of kids who crash and die. And knowing that a young driver gets distracted by the more passengers you have, and they shouldn't have passengers, helping to maintain that is really important. So the other route to injury prevention is just engineering or other passive methods so you don't have to decide something. And the other thing is enforcement of laws, just because it strengthens the message. Some of the challenges, which the question is, how do people do risk assessment? If you're a coal miner and you go to work every day in a coal mine, then your assessment of risk is probably a little bit different than mine, because if it weren't, you wouldn't be able to go to work. Your tolerance of that level of risk is higher. So an ATV may not seem like a big risk to you. I think it's important or you mostly may think it never happens to you. I think that's the other really big thing. And so the other challenge for us is a lot of times, how do we convey cause without blame? And this is really important, like with safe sleep, because we've had twins where a twin will die and 6 months later they still don't have a safe bed for the other twin because it's a SIDS rather than a suffocation. And if you don't give people the tools to know how their behavior did impact it, how do we help change it for the next child? But yet how do we, and it's the same thing, how do we see two populations of people in the ICU with ATVs, those who basically are going to give it away and you're never going to ride an ATV again, and those who are going to go out and buy them a new one to replace the one they just crashed. Obviously, those people make two very different sets of assumptions, and I'm not sure how you help them make the ones that you hope will be safer, but try. The other thing is targeting a group. When we frequently will get a phone call that says something like, well, we've got this family that keeps coming to school with their little kid unbuckled in the front seat. So we don't normally just go after the one person, but we will sometimes provide the whole classroom with education on how you should be buckling up your child. So nobody's identified or targeted, but at the same time, everybody gets educated. And that's the other thing, is just trying to provide information on what you should do to keep your child safe, not just what you shouldn't do. Because I think people are they're so overloaded too with, all the there's so many things to protect your child against, it's really difficult. So in terms of practical everyday stuff, you can think about prevention any way that works for you. Like, you could decide today is a good day to think about kids in hot cars. It was 56 degrees this morning. It was cold, it was nice, but it's like 85 or 86 out there now. And a kid locked in a car right now could die. But this morning, no one would have thought about heat. So, it's okay to say, well, today I'm just going to ask everybody who comes into my clinic, my office, my whatever, I'm going to ask them, like, well, about hot cars. And I'll come back to that in a second. But you also could do it by topic. You could do it by seasonal issue. Like, maybe you only talk about fire in October and you talk about drowning in March, and that's okay too. Whatever works for you. And the other thing is by age and developmental stage. So for instance, what people in WIC talk about is probably going to be different than what school health talks about, which might be different even than the frisky people talk about, because you're getting people at different ages. It's not very helpful really to talk about childproofing your house to a mom of a 2-week-old, because that baby's not mobile yet, and it's just like she's trying to sleep and feed that baby and survive, and she's not really thinking about childproofing her house yet. But it would be helpful to talk about it at 4 months, because before they come back for 6 months, that baby might be mobile, so that's a good time to talk about it. Or like at 2 months, to talk to them about not propping them on a sofa, because the first time that baby ever rolls over but can't roll back, if they're on a sofa, they may get stuck. So you have to sort of know where they are but know what's coming, and that's where you all are experts, because you do know these things. So I just want to talk for a second about hot cars. I think there have been at least 7 children who've already died this year in hot cars in various places. And we used to be a high death state. And because of that, we were actually given an opportunity one year to be an emphasis state and have a lot of PR about this. And we were kind of a weird state because our reasons didn't reflect the national average. But in general, if you look at the 700 and some babies and toddlers who have died in hot cars since the records have been kept, more than half of those have died en route to daycare. So there's a solution that really would work, and there is a copy of this on our child care health consultant's website as well, or a version of it. But it was also started by a woman whose baby named Ray Ray died, which is that a lot of people who leave their child in the car unintentionally on the way to daycare are people who are just like us. The majority of those deaths come from people just like us. And it's usually something unusual. You have a new baby, so mom always took the child to daycare, but this time it's dad, and everybody's sleep deprived, and there's a whole new schedule, and everything's different. And the baby in the back falls asleep, and dad forgets to turn left instead of right, and goes to work and doesn't know, or mom. And sometimes it's moms too. But it's the same thing. It's almost always a disruption of your normal routine. But because more than 50%, almost 50% of them die going to daycare, one phone call could save almost half those kids. And so, yeah.
One of the things that I used to be in early childhood education. One of the things that I promoted.
Can you talk louder? Because I think they're trying. Yeah.
Put a personal item that you don't normally, like a woman's purse, the man's briefcase, your lunch pail, in the back seat where the child is.
Right, because then you can't.
You're going to remember your lunch pail, your purse, or your briefcase, and
Yeah.
you see your kid there.
Yeah, and that is one way. And the other way, which is a really neat thing, is something called, well, it was called Ray Ray's Pledge originally, but because, like you said, I mean, if in case you didn't have that, and that is another good way. Some people set alarms on their phone. Some people call each other. They've experimented with various things to actually alarm if there is somebody in the baby seat. But the other really simple method too, along with the leaving something in the back, is simply getting people to make an agreement with their childcare. And really, school and early start, Head Start could be the same way. You know, if you don't see a child who always comes, and they don't show up one day, and no one's called you to say that child's sick or they're not coming, then that one phone call to the family, you know, within, say, 30 minutes, could have saved most of those kids. So getting families to agree that they're not going to just not show up without calling you, which also, in the case of daycare, really helps the daycare providers in terms of their staffing, because they don't have people just not showing and not knowing they're going to not come for the whole day. So that one phone call really can make a big difference. Leaving something in the back, you know, also does. But this is the time of year I really, really worry about, because it's when it's cold in the morning and then it's hot, people just are not thinking it. They don't realize we stood in a parking lot at a soccer field and watched 2 kids get locked in a car. The mom came, she put the child in a booster seat, had a very tight harness, and she couldn't get out of it herself. And her younger child was bopping around the car, and she went around the other side to put him in his seat. But she left her keys on the front seat and closed the door and walked around the car, and he was loose in the car, and he leaned on the window and he locked the windows. And despite her repeatedly asking him, he did not know how to make the windows go up. So we were all standing there, and it was kind of a little bit cooler than today, and there was a really nice breeze outside, but there's no breeze in the car. So, and anywhere that's a city, any of you who live in any place with Pollack will come for free and open anybody's car for a child locked in it. But there's lots of this state where Pollack isn't. And so we stood there and we debated, you know, we called the police, we called Pollack, and, you know, we stood there with them. But it was amazing in that time. You could watch them get really red and sweaty. And we were sort of debating, well, do we break their windows? We know people are on the way. You know, it's not super hot today, but it's hot in that. But it was interesting because there was a young police officer standing with me. He said, well, you know, it's not a very hot day, so I think we're okay. I'm like, okay, but it's not a very hot day because there's this great breeze out here. But in there's no breeze. And I think also people think if you leave the windows down, if you leave it in the shade, that's not enough to protect the inside of a car from getting really, really hot. So just encouraging people, but again, the positive. You know, we in this state have had a number of issues where people have left their kids in hot cars to go into used clothing stores. So we've had kids die that way, and we've also had multiple people arrested that way. So making the rounds of the used clothing stores in your neighborhood and just making sure that they know to invite people in. You know, they have a sign that says, welcome, we're glad you're here, please bring your children in with you. You know, stuff like that that's positive but can really make a difference, I think. So we have had, knock on wood, no hot car deaths in Kentucky, definitely this year, and I believe not last year, but there was one right before we started the campaign the year before that. In our state, we also have had the situation that people left their kids in the car intentionally. They were not forgotten. So sending people, you know, we've had enough car thefts now with kids in them from our state that you would think people would get the message too. You know, they leave the car running and they run in to get cigarettes at 7-Eleven and they come out and the car's gone with the child. So that's another good reason not to. And that's been happening more, so I'm hoping that the theft issues will help drive the safety issues otherwise. But the other thing is that we do tend to leave our cars unlocked. And the issue that kids play in cars, sometimes they climb in trunks. So trying to get people to lock their cars when they get out, which right now is probably a pretty good thing because they've been going through them for money too. But, you know, that's a safety issue. And the other thing is if you're missing a child, the first place to look if there's any water nearby is water, particularly for any child with autism, but for any child, because water's the most, you know, time is of the most essence in water. So look in the water, and the second place is the trunk. Because again, that would save a number of kids who go missing. So those are just practical. And law enforcement and EMS know that too, which is good. So I'm going to skip over this, but this is in here. But just how we know what we know about deaths and injuries, it's in your in here, but you can read that. But just the issue that we were talking more about deaths, but there's lots of injuries that are less severe but still important. So by topic, I just want to talk again about fire a little bit. Because in our state, fire comes from a lot of different sources. From alternate heating sources, that's not such an issue now because it's not cold. But candles, we do have lots of people who burn candles and don't necessarily have them in chimneys. Kitchen fires, matches, lighters, and extension cords under rugs. Matches and lighters are a biggie in our state. You know, making sure people keep the equipment where kids can't get them. In terms of detection, again, fire detection everybody, last time when I talked about this at the state health department, it was in October a few years ago. There were, I think, 120 people there, and 12 people had changed their batteries when the time changed. Now, if you have 10-year batteries, you don't have to do that. But so we changed clocks this spring, and I wonder how many people changed their batteries. Anybody else? No. Well, so here's why you want to do that if you don't have 10-year batteries. Because people think rightfully that the batteries will cheap and tell you when they need to be changed, and they will. But maybe they're cheaping right now while you're sitting here. By the time you get home, they won't be cheaping anymore, they'll be dead. But you won't know they're dead because they're not talking. So that's the reason that people suggest changing them at least once and preferably twice a year if they're batteries that have to be changed, because that way you just always know they're working. The other thing is, it used to say on every floor outside every bedroom. I think that because they know so many people smoke in bed, the recommendation kind of changed to in every bedroom and at least one on every level. So most of us running smoke alarm programs now, and this is worth you're probably knowing, at least our programs, instead of rather than saying, oh, well, you can only have one for your household and one for your household, we will let them have as many as it takes to get that household up to code. And we do have a whole lot of smoke alarm projects in the state. So the Red Cross also has been putting in smoke alarms everywhere. We've had a few of those old wooden houses that have required like 12 smoke alarms, but most people only need 2 or 3. So if you need one, please call. The other thing is we have a lot of old mobile homes, and a lot of our mobile homes were not fireproofed in the way that current ones are. So they burn really, really fast. And for families that you know of with mobile homes, it's really important. If they have bedrooms at each end, like most, they need a smoke alarm at each end, because those seconds count for them. So the other thing is just to have an escape plan and not go back. And really to have an escape plan, like for instance, we're going to leave here, we're going to meet at the tree out back, and then we're going to call 911. And that's the plan. And nobody should go back in, because if you're straight that that's where you are, then you don't get confused. Otherwise, there's a lot of confusion. But I think there's a lot of effort in our state to take care of yourself and to put it out yourself. But it's really better to get out and call the fire department if you can. Now, I know when I spoke one year at the Children with Special Healthcare Needs Conference, the state fire marshals hate fire extinguishers, because the time you use that is the time you should be using to get out of your house. It's the very limited time you have. On the other hand, as somebody said, if you're a person who gets out of bed and gets on a rollerboard or a wheelchair, that fire extinguisher may give you the extra time that you need to get your equipment. So I just wanted to make sure to say that, because I realize that's different. Also, speaking of that, we have a few fire alarms for people who are deaf. There are special fire alarms that vibrate and have strobes, and we have a few of those, and we can try to access more if people have families that need them. Just, getting out first and not going back in. One time on the radio in Lexington, they had a special thing that said, if you had a fire in your house and you got out, what would you go back in and get? And I called them up and said, I don't want you giving that message, because you don't want them to go back in and get anything. But anyway, people should stay out. The other thing is that, some people, the windows are painted shut, or the windows are these high little windows. Like, think about that. In some of the ranch houses, the high little windows, well, can you even get to them? And can you fit out them if they're little, is a question. And do they actually open? And also that your children, we had in our family a long time a very good escape plan that entailed my younger daughter being able to open her window and get out on the porch roof. And the only catch with that was that even without it locked, she could actually not open the window, which we didn't know till we actually had her try it. Because if you make it so it doesn't fall down, or they don't just hop out of doors when you don't want them to, how do you make it so kids don't wander, but at the same time they can get out in a fire? But the other really biggie is that those of you who take care of like kindergartners and younger, families with small children need a much more detailed plan than what we have previously advised people. Because in a fire, what happens is, like, you are looking for me and you're looking for these kids and the kids are looking for you, and everything is really, really confusing. And so small children especially who are not going to get themselves out, if we could make a plan and say, okay, you're going to go and get Jamie, and you're going to go and get Susie, and this is how it's going to be, and then we'll meet at the tree, then at least, because we reviewed a bunch of deaths in which the parents survived and the kids did not. And that seemed like that was the issue, that people just didn't have a clear enough plan. So drowning. Water's a really great thing. Water's great for playing in, swimming in, but we do have drowning risks. And some of them are, like the bathtubs and the mop buckets are all the time ones. But the swimming pools and lakes and rivers are obviously more important in the summer. I don't know, do any of you come from counties we've had a lot of drownings already this year, actually. Do any of you come from counties that have had drownings? Nobody? Okay. Because we also have a very small drowning prevention grant that we will happily share with counties, and there are a number of counties. This is a little kiddie pool, and you would think no one could drown in this much water. But if you fall into it and you can't get your face out of it, you can. So they always tell you to empty it and not leave it, with water, because somebody can fall in. The problem with that is when you fill it up, it's really cold. So most people don't really empty them. They leave them to warm up a little. But to know that any buckets, mop buckets, the same way, a toddler who's crawling but can just pull up and lean into the bucket has a big head and can fall in head first. And that's why on a lot of those, those big 5-gallon buckets, there's that big warning symbol, because, they're really stable. So if a kid falls in with their head first, they won't tip over. So that's why it's important to empty them. There's a special emphasis this year on open water, and most of the open water they're talking about is lakes, and that's good. I mean, we have a lot of people in our state who cannot swim. The YMCA in a lot of places is partnering with people. So if you know of families that tend to fish, and I mean, this is where I think your knowledge comes in too, because if you know of families that would be really great to go for swimming lessons because they fish and that, and they don't swim. Well, they're on the bank and they can fall in. So that might be a good family to say, by the way, the Y is giving reduced price lessons on Fridays. Can your child come for 4 weeks or whatever? But open water lakes, Laurel Lake. Is anybody here from Laurel County or Mercer County? Not either. Okay. Not Mercer either. Mercer County has a lake, and they actually, on the Army Corps of Engineers website, used to have really great free posters you could download and laminate. Unfortunately, they went away at the beginning of this administration, so they're gone. But they told us about that, and we were able to share those with others. Laurel Lake has a rock in it, and every single year, somebody drowns swimming to the rock because it's further than it seems. And there was a great poster that showed that. It says it's further than it looks, which it is. So, that's one other thing. But the other biggie in our state is boating. And one of the things that can happen, in Seattle, they have a loaner program. So, like, if you want to go boating one day, you go down to the dock and you rent a canoe, and they give you a life jacket as part of that. But sometimes you have a dock where you maybe keep a boat, and they will also, you have a loaner program there too, so that your guests that week, who include kids, you don't have any kid life jackets. So you borrow them, you sign them out, you go boating, and you bring them back. So that's something that could be done in any marina here, and there is at least one other marina in Kentucky that is doing this. But just encouraging people to wear their life jackets. How many people know about the Elkhorn Creek? Anybody here? Oh, okay. Well, I used to be a whitewater boater, and every year we'd go kayaking down there, and every year we'd pull people out of the water because they'd go, they'd rent a canoe for the day, and there's some places on there with some pretty good waves. There's some class 3 rapids on there. And when you dump, if you have a life jacket, you're going to float high enough that you get to breathe. But without it, every wave is coming over your face. And so we would pull people out, and it was just like, if you could just wear a life jacket. And the other thing we have a lot of is dams, and trying to teach people to stay away from dams, because dams, when the water comes over a dam, a low-head dam, it basically forms a recirculating washing machine, which you cannot get out of, which is why boaters have a very big respect for dams, and no one will go mostly anywhere near a dam. But so the other thing is just supervision. Kids love water, and when the water's high especially, when you can throw sticks in and watch them go and boat. So supervision around water is really important too. I don't know, has anybody else had any good suggestions about what to do around water? No? Well, there is one other really important thing. There's a huge number of people that have above ground pools, not just kiddie pools. But I mean, just in the last few weeks, seeing the number that have sprouted, most people with in-ground pools, you want a 4-sided fence. So why, if I have a pool outside my house, is it not sufficient for me to fence the 3 sides? Well, the neighbors will stay out, right, if I fence the 3 sides? Well, I mean, if my house is here and I fence 3 sides. What's that? Right. So you've protected all your neighbors, but not your own children, which is why the 4th side of fencing is so important, because otherwise your own children can walk out your back door and fall in the pool. And so having the 4th side of fencing is a very effective tool. The problem with above ground pools is most people aren't going to fence a pool that's an above ground pool. You're not going to build a permanent fence around something that's not permanent. And so it's really hard to protect people from drowning above ground pools. And the only recommendation the Consumer Product Safety Commission has really made is at least take out the steps. Take out the ladder, take it away so you've made it less easy for them to just walk right up and fall in. The only problem with that is if they fall in, then they can't get out. But that's the recommendation that they've made. And then again, for boating, it's just life jackets, life jackets, life jackets. In Louisville, they have a big event where the Coast Guard goes up and down the river, and they do it every year, so the kids are used to it. And when they see them, they get all excited. But if you're wearing your life jacket, you get a ticket for ice cream. And if you're not, you get a ticket. But, the kids all know, and they want the ticket for ice cream. I mean, so we can do positive things to reward good behavior. So I just wanted to say this was in there in text, just because the last year that we actually, which was 2015, that we actually looked at the drowning data. Usually our drownings are a mix of things, which is what makes it so difficult in Kentucky. We have high water that rises and falls rapidly, and almost every spring we've had people swept away. This year, knock on wood, we didn't. But we used to regularly have them. We have big lakes, some of which are deep. We have tiny streams that run really fast, but that have things that can catch people. We have above ground pools. We have in-ground pools. We have such a variety of stuff that it's really hard to come up with one cause, and one idea for prevention. But the other thing is that everybody talks about the drownings of kids under 4. The kids who fall in swimming pools are usually under 4. So we do have a lot of drownings in that age group. But what we discovered was that is that there was a second smaller drowning peak in our state, and that was that year, but it's been true many years. There is also a small peak among the adolescents who go swimming alone with friends, and it's not even so much alcohol in the teenagers under 18 that we deal with. It's just they don't swim well, and things are further a lot of times. And so just being able to swim, like you go fishing with somebody and you fall in, but being able to swim would really, and assessing that if you're with a bunch of people and you're all going swimming, are you going to say, I can't swim, and not go in the water? So teaching more people to swim and wearing life jackets would definitely help. So just going places. I also do not have a watch, so somebody should give me a time check, if that's okay.
Almost 6:45.
Okay, and what time do we stop too, right? Or before? 5 minutes? You can tell me when I have. Yeah, okay. So this is also the season of travel in the summer. I mean, we travel all the time, but this summer there's a lot of people traveling. Although with the gas prices being higher, that may go down. And when the gas prices get high and travel goes down, so do injuries because fewer people travel. But car seats and booster seats are really important. And this is just an illustration. The essential issues in a nutshell are rear-facing tilt 2, because otherwise you have this really big head that in a crash, your neck takes the brunt of all that energy. And if you are in a rear-facing seat, your neck will be better protected. Forward-facing car seats with harnesses. I always say to the kids, it's like the race car drivers. That's why you wear a harness, because it keeps you in your seat well. And then booster seats. All a booster seat does is boost you up so that your seatbelts are made for, 5'8" adult men in cars. They haven't figured out how to make cars for people like me or kids. So, when you think about it, your lap belt as you slide down, comes up on your belly, and instead of resting on your hip bones, it rests on your soft belly, and in a crash, your liver can be lacerated. And again, a kid with a shoulder belt that's like hitting them in the ear is uncomfortable. So then they put it behind their back, and then they have no upper body protection. In a crash, they're thrown forward, and they hit their heads, and they can break their spines. And so booster seats just boost them so that an adult seatbelt fits properly. I could almost use one, but then I would need pedal extenders, so that doesn't work. But and then finally seatbelts. And there really are still some disparities, I think, in proper use of seatbelts and car seats. Rural areas have less good buckling up rates than urban areas. There still are other people, some people, fathers, I think, sometimes in pickup trucks tend not to buckle up as much. People who've grown up not buckling up. But it's important. The number one cause of death above age 1 in Kentucky is motor vehicle crashes. In the 1 to 4-year-old group, it's mixed. It's fire, drowning, and motor vehicles, and it's always one of those 3, but it can be any one of them. Above that, for all the kids at this point, it's motor vehicle crashes. So being properly buckled up. And what we see is in the tweens, for some reason, they stick their shoulder belts over here. So if it's over here, you're not really in it, and in a crash, you're going to come forward. It doesn't really restrain you. So just reminding them to be in their shoulder belt is really helpful. And you'll see that if you drive field trips at all. And also, if you serve kids with special needs, we have 4 special needs trained car seat techs in the state, but 90% of kids can be served in regular seats. Even if they have special needs, we can use a regular seat. There is a particular seat we got a lot of last year that several of the kids with autism have really, really liked because it's a big seat and it feels like it's very enclosing and it feels like an armchair basically to them. So you're welcome to call and talk, but most of the time they don't have to buy a special seat. So again, we talked about rear facing till 2. We lost a 6-month-old last winter who was forward facing and broke her neck in a crash in which both her parents survived. That's education. We can prevent that. There's no reason for that. We just have to help parents know the right thing. And it is complicated. And the other thing is that the price tag of seats in the past 2 years has gone up hugely. And none of our salaries have gone up hugely. So I think people are having more trouble, but trying to encourage people that there's a lot of stuff, like you don't need Nike shoes for your 2-month-old or 4-month-old. But you need a car seat, and there's not many things you really need, but that really is one of the things. So there's no problem if you know that your car seat is only 3 years old and it's never been in a crash, then it's okay, and it's not recalled. It's okay to give it to a friend, but you should never be buying used car seats. And there are counties in the state where they don't have any place to buy new ones and people are buying used seats, but we really, really try to get seats to them and help. We are currently basically out of seats, but we can help you try to figure out who in your community would help with seats. But also, every one of you just about has somebody near you who can help you if you have a car seat question. They may be fire department, they might be police department. Almost every state police post has at least one person, usually the public affairs officer, who is trained and can help you. Many health departments do, and primarily within hands, but not all. So those are some of the other places. But just knowing if you see something that doesn't look right to you, just being able to say to somebody, why don't you go call them and get it checked out? That's really helpful. The other thing is just when people, how many people here, does anybody do WIC? Oh, okay. I mean, yourselves? Okay. Because when people come to see you with their babies, how many times do people come with their infant seat covered over with a blanket? And you're sitting there with them and the blanket's still on. And you're like, is there a baby under there and are they breathing? I worry about that because I think, the whole issue that we really need to send a stronger message to parents that your baby has to breathe. And when you cover their face, whether it be sleeping in bed on a soft surface, they can't get their face unprotected, so you need to help them breathe. So don't cover their faces if you can. But we'll come back to that in a second. But as far as car seats, so rear facing till 2, and then forward facing with a harness as long as you can. We used to push people faster. We know that the longer you can stay in one stage until you have to move up, it's better. There's no reason to hurry through the stages because the best safety is almost always to stay where you are as long as you can. And realistically, parents have better, I mean, a kid in a harness seat is always going to be a better passenger. So that's an easier thing. And when they graduate from a harness because they're too big, they still might need a high back booster. High backs and low backs, no backs are both protective. It has to do with whether or not you have a headrest. If you don't, you need a high back one. And sometimes it just has to do with what people do. If you travel a long way every day and your child is sleeping on the door, they would do better in a high back booster because it supports them better. If they're 11 years old and still need a booster because they're just not tall enough, like some of our kids, they're not gonna be willing to ride in a high back booster, and reasonably not. But a no back booster that looks like a pillow might be acceptable to them, and it will keep them safe. So being able to adapt it a little bit is helpful. Right. So just again, also a lot of it is what we talk about. Like you have a 4-year-old who's little and still in a harness seat. And we hear people saying, well, he's in a baby seat. Well, if you talk about it that way, obviously he's not going to want to stay in it. So your guidance to help parents talk about it is, this is the seat that keeps you safe. Instead of saying it's a baby seat. Or like we say to kids, here's your big kid seat if we give you a big booster. So just staying harnessed as long as possible. And then there are forward-facing seats and then booster seats. If you have people coming into clinic and they drive in and their kids are in the back seat and you can't see anything but the top of their heads, they need booster seats. We actually had a school system call us because they wanted to buy seatbelt adjusters because their whole second grade class was having trouble with seatbelts. It's like, yeah, but don't buy a seatbelt adjuster. What that does is it pulls it up right on their belly. What they need is booster seats. All those kids, they're telling you they need booster seats. Most of them will be more comfortable in a booster seat. So anyway, we can skip through that. But just again, I think I'm going to just talk about Safe Kids a little bit. Safe Sleep. This is a year-round issue, and again, if you have any families, then the number one cause below age 1 of injury-related death is suffocation in unsafe sleep in our state. And I've been a nursing mother and I've been a sleep-deprived working mother, and it's really difficult. But I don't think that the camps who promote breastfeeding and have to be against safe sleep. Bassinets are really great because you can put them right near you. I think we have to say to people that people all over the world sleep with their babies, but they don't have soft mattresses and lots of covers like we do in Kentucky. And that's less true in the summer, but the soft mattresses are still true. And this is a huge issue, not just with people we regard as, quote, at risk. It's the children, it's the friends of my daughters. Who on Facebook you see this all the time, and I'm tearing my hair because, is it my place to say something? Well, we are losing a lot of kids still to unsafe sleep. And there's a lot of people who want their kids to sleep in very soft environments, but really I do want to show you one thing, alone on your back in a crib is the real, so here is what the federal safe sleep stuff that's free that you can get looks like. And it's okay. But think about it. The sheet is plain, the wall is plain. At least the baby has stripes. But this is from the Cuyahoga, Ohio Child Death Review report. We need to send the message to people in a way they can hear that we're not saying your baby has to live in a prison and everything be plain. Put the decorations on the baby, put the decorations on the sheets, put the decorations on the wall, but don't put a bunch of stuff in the crib with the baby, and that message still needs to get out there because almost every month we still review babies who die in unsafe sleep. And I think there's another subset of people that you all are really well primed to talk to, which is NICU graduates. I know that our NICU does a very, very good job about safe sleep teaching, but I think that there's an issue that people coming out of the NICU especially, and people whose kids have been sick, want their kids to feel loved and supported and surrounded by soft things. And I think we probably need to be saying even more than we are. The first time your baby gets sick, you want that baby to sleep in bed with you so you can keep an eye on it, but that's when the baby isn't going to breathe very well because they already have a cold. So you want your baby to be in a safe place next to you. All new parents are tired, impaired people, essentially. So if you can put your baby right next to you, but not in the bed where somebody might inadvertently roll on them, that would be better. And so they should be face up. They should be alone on their back in a crib. And the D in Kentucky, as you know, is danger or drugs. But impaired parents are a danger to sleeping babies. I think the issue that sometimes people think, well, I don't do drugs, so I can sleep with my baby. The problem with that is that, in a way, fatigue impairs all new parents. The other thing is that we have a lot of obese people, and there is some question, I think, there's a lot of disordered sleep breathing in people who have obesity too, so that's another risk for not waking up in a normal way. But so the best thing is to put the baby in their own space. And it doesn't matter if it's a crib, pack and play, a bassinet. I don't know, have you all heard about baby boxes, and do you all have questions about them or not really? Because there are a few counties using baby boxes. I know we've talked about this. The concern is, well, there are some concerns. Nobody has evaluated baby boxes for their safety. They now come saying, don't put the lid on the box when the baby's in it. But I think, which, is useful because you can use it actually to stabilize it on the outside. The new ones, I think, are coming without lids, actually. Okay. So anyway, but having babies have a safe sleep environment is really, really important. And I know I only have 5 minutes, so I want to talk about one other thing, and I've missed pedestrian safety too. You see this, I'm sure, too. Just teaching people to hold their kid by the hand. When you're coming inbound on Russell Cave Road and the speed limit is 40 and people do 50, and there's a child at the edge of the sidewalk that is going to step into the street, holding people's hands at bus stops, and I think would be really helpful. The one other thing that I wanted to talk about just real briefly again is just teen driving, and the issue that that teens need. The reason for graduated driver's licensing is to try to give teens the experience of driving and learning how to drive before you put distractions in there. And it's not just about texting in our state. It's also about inexperience plus speed plus unforgiving roads is really a bad combination. And when you add to that passengers, it becomes really difficult. So trying to because parents are not understanding why we have GDL. We have a pretty good law that no one ever gave us any funding to educate anyone about in the state. So the reason that you have to have 50 hours of practice is to try to learn how to do it with an adult in the daylight. And then the hope is that you get 6 months to try it on your own, but without passengers and in daylight and in better weather and good conditions. And only then, and if you don't have any moving violations, you move on and you get a full license. But the issue that it's probably not realistic or safe to put all your siblings in the car with you because you're still distracted, even if they're family and even if it's technically allowed. So it's not a great idea. So, trying to say to families, we know it's a hassle, there's not a lot of public transportation, but you've driven them for 16 years. What's another 6 months if you can bring them home alive? And that's what we're trying to, we're trying to never have somebody have it be them and yet somehow get them to help prevent all of this.